Welcome to our lecture on South Asian Islam, and specifically we're going to be talking about three sort of saintly holy figures today, and we'll do a little bit of theory about why we're looking at these types of people in the study of religion. And it should be noted, they're all Sufi figures, so we are really getting to the nuts and bolts of Sufi here. Notice we have not been talking about Rumi. Notice we've not been talking about Western twirling dervishes or the woo-woo masters. We are in South Asia, and Sufi very much is the Islam that not necessarily dominates, though it does dominate. I mean, it gets everywhere. Sufi is everywhere in South Asian Islam, even though you see a lot of hardline Muslims these days critiquing it. So let's get into it. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is a little bit of theory. So a lot of people, religion is often considered to be like sort of a set of beliefs or stories or scriptures, and these are important aspects, absolutely. But religion should also be studied as it's practiced, as it's lived, as it's embodied. So for instance, I have this picture here of a tree with a shrine in it that, you know, if all you can think about Hinduism is, say, stories about Shiva and Narayana, you're not going to be able to understand what's going on at these trees that have all these offerings made to it of fabric and whatnot, and what's going on with that slab and that small shrine. But this is the Hinduism that is involved in people's sort of daily lives. So in this class, we've been sort of focusing on religious rituals and religious lives. Even though we've talked quite a bit about doctrine, you'll notice I'm always pivoting back to what do people actually do? How do they do this stuff? What are the rituals involved? And what are people's lives like who are religious people? So religious boundaries, they seem so fixed in a textbook. If you're reading a textbook on world religions, it's going to be like, oh, here's the 5 religions, and that's it. But in reality, when we listen to religious debates amongst religious people, or we listen to interfaith dialogue, we see that these specific boundaries are not always so clear. In our study of religion on the ground, as people do it, we see over and over again that folks cross religious boundaries regularly when they go to powerful places, revere powerful figures, or perform powerful practices, such as Sikhs and Hindus going to Malar Kotla, such as our Hindu woman Arvasi that we started the section on Hinduism with, who goes to this Sufi dargah where she's heard there's a pir who has quite a bit of power. So on the ground, we see that these distinctions are a little more blurry. In the book, they're very distinct. In a book, Hinduism and Buddhism, these two do not meet. But when you go and walk around in Nepal, for instance, you ask someone, are you a Hindu or are you a Buddhist? They'll say, I'm a Buddhist this lifetime. I'll be a Hindu the next. They just don't see this solid division between religions that one finds in textbooks or when just looking at scripture. So one of the key things that we find about studying religion on the ground is that we have worldliness, prosperity, the effectiveness of gaining prosperity opposed to getting heaven brings us back to the world and the ways religious people react to being in the world. If you study the way people have prosperity, the wheel, W-E-A-L, the goodness of life and how they acquire that through transactions with beings, you're going to be right in the folds of what do people do? You're called back to the world. This isn't how many bodhisattvas can dance on the head of a pin. It is, how does somebody interact with a deity to find their lost goat or heal a disease, which are very, very much this worldly, fleshy, lively, lived experiences. So the 3 people that we're going to be talking about today are Lal Perry, the Red Fairy, Sheikh and Malar Kotla, who we've talked about before, and Satya Peer. So the thing is, all these figures sort of cross religious boundaries, but they're always pushing toward an authentic, lived experience in a specific place. So all these figures are Sufis. And we got to see that Sufi is not just some sort of pietistic or mystical experience, so that's definitely part of it in Sunni Islam, but it's a way of life for wandering men and wandering women. We also note that within Sufi, you see one of the things that's so vaunted in Orthodox Sunni Islam is the distinction between the sexes and the separation of the sexes. But in Sufi, women are involved. Women are saints. Women are involved in the communities. Even as we look back into the oldest, our oldest records of Sufis, we see women are present. Okay, so these Sufi figures spread Islam across India into all the frontier places, and they remain the vibrant heart of Islam all over India, rural and urban. So you go out to these little shrines, you get the sense of, oh, this is the Sufis of the frontier. But you go to Delhi, and there's Qawwali every Tuesday night. And it's these Sufi traditions that really bring the vibrancy of the Muslim community. And if you're in New Delhi, go to Qawwali. Go to one of the big ones. Go to the mosque, hang out. You'll have a wonderful time. People will be just lovely to you. The Sufi is also a religion that embraces difference, embraces people, and brings them in. So the figures in this tradition, however, is under constant challenge the past 100 years, as orthodoxy, the straight doctrine, ortho like orthodontics, straight dontic teeth, orthodox, straight doctrine, orthopraxis or orthopraxy, straight or perfected, not perfected, straight practices. Orthodoxy reinvents Islam based on Arabic textual traditions that are not Indic, that are purely Islamicated. And in that case, Sufi is seen as being heterodox and heretical. So as this new Muslim orthodoxy reinvents itself, saying that is the oldest form, is actually the newest form, it goes after these traditions such as Sufi, which challenge orthodoxy, but also are inherently local. So Sufi practices are challenged as being not Muslims. Which practices? Dancing and song. Cults to the saints, because they would say you can't worship a person, you can only worship God. Dargahs, so these saintly tombs where they'd say this is not a mosque, it's a tomb, and we don't pray to tombs. The experience in the heart, the mystical experience of the Sufis often use this imagery of the heart, whereas an Orthodox Muslim would say, God is out there, not in your heart. Sort of a unifying God that goes beyond religious distinctions. And paradise within oneself. The Sufis will say, paradise is right here. You don't need to die to go to paradise. It's right here in your own heart with God. All right, so our first guy is Sheikh, who we've talked about quite a bit. And we looked at an article that is also by Anna Bigelow. This is an article that's written the same year that was published in Islam in South Asia and Practice, which was edited by Barbara Metcalf, who's a really important scholar of South Asian Islam. So these are hagiographic texts. Now, hagiographic means it's writing about saints or holy writing. So these aren't necessarily exactly histories. We find them all over the West in our sort of studies of saints and Catholicism as much. And one could even say that our writings about, say, Martin Luther King are almost hagiographic in the fact that they embellish the saintliness of the saint at all times. And then in hagiography, you often see lots of miracles happen, supernatural things. And the goal of them is not to record actual events, but to inspire devotion in the hearers. So these hagiographic texts, they function both to entertain the audience, but also assure them of a saint's grace and the saint's effectiveness at aiding in a devotee's life. We know that a saint is popular, or we know that this saint, Sheikh, is particularly popular in the region, but it also pulls people from outside the Punjab. And we also see Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims alike coming to the shrine in Malar Kutla. Locals are less concerned with the specific history of Sheikh and Malar Kutla as the contemporary argument that he is a saint of the people, the one who establishes the ocean of tolerance. They even use the phrase Hamare Satya Peer in Urdu, which means he is all of our leaders. He is the saint to all of us. Many of the stories that we read in Bigelow describe Sheikh, who was originally from Afghanistan, and he came to Malar Kutla, and he established himself by a little place by the river. And there's a lot of also interactions with this Afghani warlord named Bolo Lodi. And he actually ended up being a big ruler in Delhi amongst the Mughals at this time. So and I wanted to go over this a little bit of summary, but you can look at the specific writings in the text. The Gadi Nishan, who's the head of the Dargah, actually writes this small book about Sheikh, highlighting his sort of grace and anger, but also describing means where how people should behave as devotees to him. So Gadi Nishan is the head of the Dargah. So he's like the administrator and also main ritualist at the Dargah. He's from the Calipha. Calipha are the descendants, the hereditary descendants of the saint. And he writes this short book about this historical saint's life. It describes mostly stuff about his grace, but also his anger, with directions for how devotees and pilgrims should behave to ensure his grace and ward off that danger. The text has a little of the usual conventions of Muslim writing, even in the Punjab. It doesn't have any Quran quotes, doesn't have any specific formulaic blessings, or sort of this poetic couplets that are used in Persian and Arabic and sort of Muslim style writing. The text is mostly concerned with connecting to people and describing the miraculous powers of the saint. So the text does show certain evidence that that we have a long-standing tradition of pilgrimage. The text actually describes throngs of people who make the pilgrimage to the Dargah. So that legitimates the practice. And there's even a sort of like a throwaway line in there that talks about possession practices. So where we saw that the Chelas, these Hindus and Sikhs, would become possessed with Hedar Sheikh and be able to speak to them and alleviate their pain, solve their problems, or give them remedies. Most of the stories that have miracles are usually about people who are devoted to the Sheikh and then are granted sons. Many of these stories describe this powerful and pious saint coming to a river near Malakutla and setting himself up. Upon settling there, him or one of his friends will lose their shoes in the river. And he's like, don't worry, and then the river just puts the shoe back. So shoes and rivers. There is a fair amount here about rivers and water. Let's remember that, I don't think I said this before, Punjab is derived from two Sanskrit terms, pancha and up, meaning the 5 rivers or the 5 waters. It's also the breadbasket of India. So whereas Bengal makes a lot of rice, the Punjab makes most of the wheat from India. There's a lot of wheat cultivation. So irrigation is very important in a lot of the scriptures. So talking about a river sort of makes sense because it's a place where they grow wheat and they need agricultural irrigation. So yes, so then there's other stories about how the saint's hut is knocked down, but even though all the swirling storms around, his lamp lights on. So it's symbolized like his interior light cannot be blown out. The light of his holiness in his heart cannot be blown out. All of these sorts of ideas are found in these themes. We do actually have a story that gets told often about the saint being given a horse, but he's like, what would I do with this horse? And he has no use for it, so he gives it away. And then when the owner hears about this, he gets all pissy. Well, not the owner, but the donor comes back and says, where's my horse? I can get my horse away. And he says, oh, you mean like this horse? And they'll like magically create like 1,000 horses that look exactly like the one that was given to him. So these are kind of common stories. We argued, especially in Bigelow's article before, that one of the interesting things about the saint is he brings forth a potent ethical and moral component to his message. And in this text, we see that the author writes a big, long set of regulations for how pilgrims and devotees should behave. So again, appealing to this moral nature of behaving well, being tolerant. Also, it's pretty sexist. But, what are you going to do? That's this writing in this time period. What are you going to do? Okay, so there are also some folk tales. So that previously what I was describing was what was written by one of these guys, the head of the Khalifa. But these folk tales are a bit more informal. They're told by the different hereditary people, the Khalifa, that hang out in the shrine that are related to the saint. We notice that there's a wide range of vernacular or like spoken tales that use interchangeable religious language. So Sikhs and Muslims in these tales will even call him Bhagawan. Bhagawan is the Lord, is the name of the Lord. Is the name of God in Sikhism and Hinduism, but they'll use this for Hedar Sheikh, which is intriguing. So the tales will tell sort of stories about the saint coming, and they also tell the light that goes on no matter how often his hut is blown down. They also have a lot of stories about how he used to be a military man and a great general, but he secretly in his heart was a fakir, was an ascetic. And then these stories sort of take on a tone of how he once was a great military general, but he aspired to the Sufi love of peace. And so it becomes sort of a conversion tale about Hedar Sheikh. I wanted to read to you one story that's really important. This is the story of the Sheikh confronting a wandering yogi. Now, we hear this trope of a yogi sort of challenging a saint often, especially in North India. I can think of a bunch of Jain texts and Sikh texts in which there's a magic contest, and usually through the potency of the Sikh or the Jain figure, they're able to defeat the yogi at his own game by showing that they're more powerful. So in this sense, it shows that the religion of this person is greater than the religion of the yogi. When the yogis tell these stories, specifically like not the yogi tells these stories, the yogi usually wins, but he's usually not competing against a Sikh or a Muslim. They don't care. They'll use these magical battles to beat a king and then establish their power over that king at that point. So when the yogis are telling their own stories, it's about kings. All right, so I'm reading from page 154. The third Khalifa's tale, the wonder-working Sheikh. Yes, it is commonly known. Once there was a competition between Babaji, who's head our Sheikh, and a yogi. He, the yogi, said, "Bring Babaji to me." He sent 2 men to bring back Babaji, but they did not return. Then he sent more, and they also did not return. When the 4th time men were sent, he asked them not to sit there, but to bring the others back. But they were not able to stand. They were incapacitated, so the yogi himself went there. He said, "I am flying. If you have some power, pull me back down." And he flew around with his magic. Babaji took off his sandals. They went up and banged the yogi on the head, and he came down. So the yogi flies up, bang, his sandals went, bang him on the head. He flops back down onto the earth. And then the yogi sort of feels sorry. And he says, "Do not send me away from here. Please keep me here." And Babaji said, "You can stand outside this gate." Then he used to stand there, and later his children would stand there. So the yogi becomes a devotee to the saint. All right, so who is this Satya Peer? Well, Satya Peer is a Bengali figure, of course. He's a sort of mythic Muslim peer or Muslim saint, famous in Bengali-speaking South Asia, so all over sort of the east of India. And he's been famous since the 16th century. Now, he was originally a Muslim, but he becomes a sort of folk hero in a genre or subgenre of pan-Bengali tales. So over time, the sort of literary output about this Satya Peer becomes more and more Hindu, to the point that little Islamic material really sticks out except for his appearance. He's dressed like a Sufi in rags and dark clothing, chains and shackles around him. So the literary output becomes really big. People start writing tons and tons about him in Bengali, which is interesting because we get more of it than we do of the Gaudiya tradition. I haven't talked about them. Gaudiyas are Vaishnava Bengalis who wrote these incredible stories about Rama and Krishna and baby Krishna, all these tales. This really florid, elaborate Sanskrit that has really intricate ideas of devotion and what it means in the heart to be devoted, and aesthetic, so what it means to have aesthetic pleasure and connecting those ideas. So it's a big genre of literature. Supposedly these Satya Peer stories are so voluminous that they rival even the Gaudiyas. So this becomes a big body of work throughout Bengal. We do see in these texts some evidence of Sanskrit influence, specifically what's called Mangal Kavya, or the Sanskrit praise, the belles lettres, the fine words of praise. We also see that throughout the text, if you look through the text that was in Religions of India and Practice, you can see that the Hindu worldview is very much on display with lots of descriptions of Hindu gods and whatnot. But you also see that whenever the peer is described, is said to equally speak the Veda as he is to speak the Quran. Okay, so like most figures of popular veneration, he sort of, he brings prosperity and well-being, he wards off disease, he fights demons. He's also known to get really angry at people who do not fulfill promises or vows, especially to him, who fail at vows that he says, or who are stingy. I noticed as I watched a whole bunch of folk tales in Bengali about him, that they usually end the story by saying, there was this one guy who said he'd do some worship of Satya Peer, but he did it in a really poor way and was really stingy. So he got eaten by crocodiles. That's what happens. If you don't do what you say you're going to do for Satya Peer, you'll get eaten by sea monsters. So over a long period, this Muslim state is Sanskritized into being a sort of incarnation of this Vaishnava Satya Narayana. So the Vaishnava god named Satya Narayana, the truthful one, he who rides upon a man. So he's almost considered an incarnation of Vishnu. So when I say Sanskritized, I mean you take a folk figure, a vernacular figure, and you start putting more translocal Hindu language around him and writing about him in the Sanskrit language. And that way he's sort of cleaned up and is made to appeal more widely, but he also loses a lot of his local color of the place and of the language. There's also a lot of connections to the sea trade. And this has to do with Bengal, like where I said Punjab, a lot of farmers. And Bengal, it's right on the Indian Ocean. in the Gulf of Bengal. So there would be a lot of sea trade and connections to sea trade from throughout Southeast Asia and from Arabia, and eventually with the West. So it is not terribly surprising that you see all of this connection to sea trade. The music was these tales were originally set to music, which really helps in memorization, and also, like in the video we saw, with a patta. We see this across various Hindu or Indian storytelling traditions, that they'll have these like almost posters. They'll tell the story and point to the posters as they go. It's interesting because when we see people who've memorized these tales, they can look at the poster, at the images, and they'll just rattle off the verses. But you take the poster away and they can't have the same degree of fluency. So there's some degree of the connection of the music and the patta, the poster, that it helps people to memorize very extensive literary productions. Okay, so Satya Peer is originally described in Sufi garb with tattered rags, and he is brutal to those who spurn him, but he's great to all who revere him. He's blind to any social division, and he addresses the daily lives and struggles. So there's sort of a primordial Bengaliness here that's not divided by Muslim and Hindu. So I like this picture here because it's got a clearly Muslim guy standing in front of a brightly painted Bengali temple. And that just kind of sums it up for me. These things did used to go together before they got so viciously separated. So as I said, we see this common problem of sea travel and sea monsters in these tales because it's connected to the Bengali Delta and its close connection to sea trade. In this strange dynamic in the contemporary world, Muslim reformers since the 19th century have sought to become more orthodox. This is a theme that will come up often. They say that Satya Peer was too Hindu and not orthodox enough, so they stopped revering him and telling his tales. At the same time, the Hindus are like, we love this guy. Let's connect him closer to Vishnu and tell his tales like crazy, even if he looks like a Sufi saint. So let's look at one quick description of him. And Religions of Indian Practice, we're looking at page 584. So Satya Peer is described in a very Hindu way. So in this Kali age, that's not Kali, the goddess Kali. Kali means the lowest throw in a throw of dice. It's like rolling snake eyes. In this Kali age, this age of degeneracy, these hard times that we live in now, where everything is topsy-turvy, the societal offices of the twice-born, the warriors, the common folk, and the lowly servers have gradually disintegrated, succumbing to the might of foreign Muslims. At this, Lord Hari came down, taking on the body and form of a fakir, and strategically positioned himself at the foot of a banyan tree. Slightly stooped, he wore a beard and a mustache, his body covered by a patchwork wrap, a cap in his hand, and in his hand, a cap on his head, in his hand a staff. From his shoulders swung a knitted bag. He was replete with splendor, effulgent like the sun itself. From his mouth poured forth the speech of Muslim peers and the prophet. His were the lips that uttered prayers to God and kissed the dust of the tombs of the saints. So we see this figure is inherently Sufi and inherently Muslim. But also the Hindus have this narrative of, oh, we're just going to call him an incarnation of Vishnu. This is a very Hindu move. Whenever they've got somebody who's of a rival religion that they really like, all right, let's just turn him into an incarnation. So finally, we're going to talk about Lal Perry, who's a real woman, and here is a picture of her. I do believe she did die relatively recently. William Dalrymple put a tweet up about that. I'm not really on Twitter, but I saw it somewhere. So Lal Perry is a Bihari woman who also lived in Bengal. So Bihar is a northern state to the east of Uttar Pradesh and to the west of Bengal. So Lal Perry is a Bihari woman who has taken up residence at the shrine of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar. Now, Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, his name means like the saint of Qalandar with the red hawk. He's known for wearing red. He's also known for turning into a hawk. He's pretty cool looking. Anyway, so Lal Shahbaz was a Sufi, and so is Lal Perry, whose name means the red fairy. Lal means red. As Sufis sort of seek their inner revelation, they also sort of transcend but don't reject religious conventions. I wanted to make this point. Sufis they break from religious conventions, but they're not what we would call antinomian. They don't break social conventions just for the sake of breaking them. Like when a tantrika drinks wine because they're not supposed to, in order to find purity in the impure, they're purposely like eating meat, drinking wine, having cross-caste sex in order to have this antinomian transgressive experience. But these Sufis are not like that. They will transcend religious conventions. They don't reject them. So as I keep arguing, Sufi is not, the path of Sufi is not an escape from Muslim regulation, but a deepening of the Muslim experience, calling one to a more embodied and more disciplined life, though also including meditation, music, and ecstatic states. So when somebody says, I like Sufi because it's not all funny like them other Muslim religions, nope, you're wrong. It is Orthodox. It is Sunni Islam. It is still very Islam. Somebody recently wrote about how Coleman Brooks, who wrote the definitive sort of translations that everybody reads about Rumi, when he went through, and also he didn't know Persian, but somehow he translated this stuff. He pulled out all of like the Orthodox Sunni imagery in this great Sufi writer. And when people describe Sufi, they usually describe it outside of Islam. This is not outside of Islam. It's very much in Islam. It's a call to greater religiosity, not a call away from religiosity. So she's a mendicant at the Dargah of Lal Shahbaz Calendar. She's a large woman who always dresses in red, because Lal Shahbaz, Lal Perry, Lal means red. She's a large woman dressed in red who dances nightly in mystic rapture, and she carries a huge club. She says that the shrine is her home. She says that the shrine is her home. This very lovely shrine here. Let's move this over here. So there's Lal Shahbaz Calendar, and here's sort of this rowdy, crazy shrine early in the morning. You can see that people are sleeping there from the night before, getting ready for the early activities. So this shrine, in fact, she says that her protector is the saint, and her peer, her religious teacher, who we'll hear about from a minute, her Sufi teacher. The shrine is located in rural Sindh, which is often dangerous, and it's a frontier area. Now, what's kind of interesting that I think about this is when we look at radical religions in India, where people are doing all sorts of interesting things or having revelations or being unorthodox anyway, they tend to be at the periphery. They also tend to be in places that are sort of dangerous. So one argument that can be made, and I make this often, is that when life is tough, people embrace mysticism, whether that be complete surrender to God, such as in Sufi, or transforming oneself into a god, i.e. Tantra. We also note that this is the same realm where the Nat Siddhas were really big, and they often overlap with the Sufis. So in places where life is hard, and in frontier areas, that's where people embrace really exciting, intricate religious thoughts, whether that's because out in the outskirts they have greater religious experiences, or because they don't have as much religious authority, or maybe it's because in the face of such uncertainty, they need something that can respond to those social tensions and social struggles and material struggles. So they embrace sort of very potent religious thinking that involve internalizing thought, or maybe even becoming a god oneself. So what's the history of our pal Lal Perry? We can see here a picture of India. In 1971, Bangladesh fought a war of independence with Pakistan. Now, as I said, in 1947, you have East Pakistan and West Pakistan were set up after partition. West Pakistan was Muslims who were generally pretty orthodox, Sunni, who spoke Urdu. Now, West Pakistan sent all of their sort of administrators over to East Pakistan to basically rule over people who were Bengali, not North Indians. They're a different ethnicity, spoke a different language. They spoke Bengali, not Urdu, and were way more Sufi than the West Pakistanis were. So it didn't go well. And in 1971, India teamed up with East Pakistan to fight a war with West Pakistan. And in 1971, Bangladesh was established. Bangladesh, the land of the Bengalis. And that would be the predominantly sort of, it's a Muslim country. It's very poor. The people are delightful. The food is fantastic, and I can't wait to get back there. Anyway, so she was actually from Bihar, which would be like over in here. So she's from Bihar, but her family moved to Bangladesh. In the 1960s, there were these Hindu-Muslim riots, and that got her family scared, and they moved to Bangladesh, and then they were there in 71 when her family just did not find sort of religious tolerance she hoped. She had a lot of memories of her youth and when she would meet and be fascinated by fakirs. So she had the idea that she might want to be a fakir one day. And at some point, the family crossed into eastern Pakistan, but there were huge floods. So in 1971, you have the Biharis, unlike the Bengalis, were kind of on the side of West Pakistan. So the Biharis were more culturally contiguous in many ways with Western Pakistani people. The Biharis mostly did not end up in Bangladesh, but would go to West Pakistan. And that's what she and her family did. So she lived there and worked, lived with her brother. But then after her brother died, she went and left and moved to the shrine. She went to the shrine with the sadhus and finally made her way to the shrine in Qalandar, in Sindh, of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar. Okay, so in time we actually hear these stories about these sadhus who got her to Sindh into the shrine of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, where she's lived for the past 20 years. Here she says she finds the religious ecstatic experiences she needs, but it's also her sustenance, it's her food, it's her shelter. Over time, she has even become a peer in her own right with her own disciples. The shrine is actually in a place called Ceylon, which has a long history of being a Shaiva place before Islam came, and having a long tradition with a number of not-siddhas. So at the shrine, one of the main practices is Urs. Now, this is a pilgrimage that happens celebrating the death of the saint, or the saint's death day. So that's when people from all around come to the shrine. Now, during Urs, there's quite a bit of Dummel dancing. So this is a slow dance that starts in the morning and it speeds up and it speeds up and everybody goes into a frenzy of joy and music and dance. And it's very exciting. You can watch lots of videos of it. It looks like a hoot. I want to do it one of these days. And then in the evening they do Qawwali, but these don't have as much dance in them. And they are ecstatic, but there's not as much people just kind of going nuts in the crescendo of the music like you see in the Dummel. Okay, so one of the critiques here that we have is of the fundamentalists. Now, Dalrymple describes an unfortunate meeting with a local Wahhabi who says that all these practices and all these people are wrong. Who are the Wahhabis? The Wahhabis were founded in Saudi Arabia in the early 20th century to create a fundamentalist form of Islam that was only about the scriptures and had no local practices. This took off like wildfire, and in fact, they were established in Pakistan and then Afghanistan, and they created the Taliban. Taliban in Arabic just means students. So it was a student movement setting up in these little local madrasas or Islamic schools to teach this really hardline Islamic law, and it's been appealing to people, mostly because they have this argument of this is what Islam was originally about. But it's not. If we look at the history of Islam, it doesn't look at all like what the Wahhabis are saying. They use a very modern, contemporary interpretation of 1,000-year-old scriptures, and then they extract a vision of Islam that doesn't match up with our historical record, and then they reject any version of Islam that doesn't connect to their sort of understanding of historical record. It's like Baptists who say they want to go back to the early church, by which they have a very specific meaning. It means like not having big churches, meeting in the homes, like communities and whatnot. But if you look at the early Christian church, it's like magic rituals, baptizing the dead, feasts in graveyards, stuff that they would be absolutely against today. So as again, with fundamentalism, it's a 20th century phenomenon where people circle the wagons and reify their religious identity and put forth a really conservative vision, but declare that it is actually an older vision, but it is not. So these Wahhabis who Dalrymple is talking to reject any Muslim syncretism or local practices. They are united into an Islamic ideal based on 20th century fundamentalist readings of Islam. They set up madrasas all over the country, and they now have them in Qalandar and Sindh as well. And they critique Sufi ideas. They critique worship of the saints. That's not really worship of the saints. So the idea is the saint is an intercessor between God, and they say, nope, there is no intercessor between God. Dancing and singing, they're like, nope, you can't do that. That's all wrong. And the whole idea of going to these tombs of the saints is completely anathema to them. In the reading for today, the one Wahhabi gentleman says, all Sufi is jaddu, which means in Hindi, that just means like, it means magic, like sketchy magic. All right, so let's see, where was I? So the thing is, the Sufis, though, they continue their sort of message of unity and love. And they say that these Wahhabis are just in it for the money, that they're not generous, The Sufis want to support others in their religious quest, but the Wahhabis want to shut people down and make sure everybody's orthodox. I wanted to close with a story about Lal Perry's calendar from page 141. This is a great little story. There's a story about Lal Perry's calendar, which Sain Sahib once taught me. That's one of her teachers. Said Lal Perry. One day, Lal Perry was wandering the desert with his friend Sheikh Bahauddin Zakaria. It was winter and evening time, so they began to build a fire to keep warm. They found some wood, but then they realized they had no fire. So Bahauddin suggested that Lal Perry turn himself into a falcon and get fire from hell. He turns into a falcon all the time. That's like his thing. So he does that. Off he flew. But an hour later, he came back empty-handed. There is no fire in hell, he reported. Everyone who goes there brings their own fire and their own pain from this world. So it's a pretty beautiful image that these Sufis say. Now, I just want to make some claims right here at the end. I'm not here to beat down on fundamentalism, be it Hindu or Muslim. I think it's wrong and ahistorical. But I'm just here to show that it's a new thing and not the old thing that they say it is. I'm not here to say that anybody's religious practice is wrong. It's just new. It's just a change. If people want to be fundamentalist, that's the way things go. That's the way religions change. I'm not here to critique or prescribe, what people should or shouldn't be doing. But I will note that, this version, this fundamentalist Wahhabi version of Islam is translocal and ahistorical. It spans the world and it does not take into account of history. So one of my friends argues that fundamentalism is good, is a Muslim guy I know, because it unifies people from all over the world when they're in the United States. So you can say, I got a Bengali, I got a Pakistani, I got an Arabian guy, I got a Bosnian. If we're all together, but we have the fundamentalist vision, we can all be unified on that. To which I say, hogwash for the fundamentalist vision is, and we're having a theological argument, is not akin to the historical record, nor does it connect with these different cultures. And you're just saying that it's good to level all cultural difference so y'all can get along in some way or another. To what end? But anyway, Fuad and I had that argument a lot of times. So it may unify things. It can unify Muslims, but it does so by tearing down old, well-established local traditions and denying the vibrancy of Islam as anything more than a set of laws and scriptures. Fundamentalism is just another change in religions over time. It's not inherently bad, it's just a change. My critique is that when it denies history and lived religious experiences, it's a problem. And it also inspires violence. So they run roughshod over other people's religions. And most of the people they run roughshod over are not other religions, it's other Muslims. They're really attacking other Muslims all the time. They're seduced by certainty. They want to have the one right answer. Even if that one right answer is a new one that declares it's old, but it's still really new. They want to be in the face of all the chaos of life and the diversity within Muslim practice. They want a unified vision. And for that, they wander around setting up their madrasas and kind of being big jerks to people. And I'd say, at the end of the day, in spite of all your religious thinking, don't be a jerk. So here we're at the end. So go listen to some more music. YouTube abounds. This Fana Fiala, who I had you read, I had you listen to today, is remarkably good. I don't like the whole Westerners doing the Indic thing, but they do it well and they have great videos and the songs are wonderful. And then also our classic Qawwali guy, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Write those names down. You can type them bad boys into YouTube and you will have hours of glorious music. All right, take care, y'all.